Legend says, in an ancient monastery, a nun died to stop something evil from escaping. In 1952, a nun in a remote monastery took her own life. The church believed the evil was gone, but years later, people began seeing the same nun again, standing behind them, in mirrors.
Pelluda door that should never open. Romania, 1952. The monastery stood like a dying memory against the cold mountains of Carca. Wind scraped across the stone walls as if trying to erase its existence. Inside, two nuns walked down a corridor lit only by trembling candles. Their footsteps echoed through hollow stone halls that seemed too large. Too empty. Sister Jessica's breath shook. "Are you certain?" she whispered. Sister Victoria clutched a heavy iron key. Her knuckles were pale. "We must contain it," she said, "before it leaves." They stopped before a massive wooden door reinforced with iron chains. On it were carved Latin words of warning. From behind the door came a low, wet breathing. Not human. The air smelled rotten. Jessica began praying, but her voice cracked. Victoria unlocked the chains. The door creaked open. Darkness spilled out like liquid shadow, and from that darkness stepped a figure, a nun, but not a servant of God. Her face was bone white. Her eyes were deep black wells. Her smile was thin. "Wrong!" Jessica screamed. Moments later, the courtyard was silent again. By morning, Sister Victoria's body hung from a rope outside the Abbey gate. Suicide, but her eyes were open, and they were still a threat. Chapter ONE. The Vatican sends its doubt in Vatican City. The report disturbed the church deeply. A nun dead by suicide inside a cloistered abbey. The church could not allow whispers of corruption or possession. They chose a man who carried guilt like a scar beneath. Scala Father Burke. He had once attempted an exorcism on a young boy. The boy had died, and Burke had never forgiven. Day himself. He believed faith should be strong enough to defeat evil, but somewhere inside him, doubt had begun to grow. They also sent Sister Irene. Young, quiet, devout, but Irene was different. Since childhood, she had experienced visions. Not dreams, visions. She saw a woman dressed as a nun, pale face, hollow eyes. The church believed her. Visions might be divine guidance. Irene wasn't sure. Sometimes they felt like warnings. Chapter TW author. The road to Cargate Romanian countryside was grey and unforgiving. Father Burke and Sister Irene traveled by train. Then carriage. Silence filled most of the journey. Finally Burke spoke. "Do you believe in miracles, sister?" "Yes, Father." "And demons?" Irene hesitated. "I believe in evil." Burke studied her face. There was something fragile but strong about her. He hoped God truly had chosen her, because if not, they would be walking into hell unprepared. Chapter Taritha. Man called Frenciat, the village near the abbey. They met a local man, Maurice Frencitorio, a delivery worker who had discovered the nun's body. He joked nervously when he spoke about the monastery, but his eyes betrayed fear. "No one goes there after sunset," he said. "Why?" Irene asked gently. Frenchy swallowed. "Because something watches." Chapter Fodar. Abbey of Sharoskarka. Abbey did not feel abandoned. It felt awake. The massive doors groaned open. Inside, candles burned. Nuns prayed, or so it seemed. The abbess greeted them calmly. Her face was mostly hidden in shadow. She explained that the order maintained a strict vow of silence at night. Burke accepted this. Irene felt something was wrong. The air was heavy, and every nun she saw seemed decent, like they were not fully there. Chapter I5e, the first night that night. Irene lay awake in her small stone cell. The wind howled like distant screaming. Then she heard footsteps. Soft, slow. A figure stood at the end of her bed, a non-face hidden. Irene, it whispered. The voice was not kind. It was hollow. Irene sat up. The figure lifted its face, white skin, black eyes. The nun, Irene screamed. Candles burst out. Darkness swallowed the room. Chapter Sisberg's guilt meanwhile. Father Burke investigated the suicide. He found blood beneath Victoria's fingernails. She had fought something. Later that night, Burke experienced his own terror. A coffin appeared in the graveyard. Inside it lay the boy from his failed exorcism. Eyes, accusing. The coffin slammed shut around. Burke, soil poured in. He screamed as dirt filled his lungs, and suddenly Frenchie was digging him out. There had been no coffin, just Burke, clawing at the earth like a madman. The Abbey was attacking their minds, feeding on their fears. Chapter Savianda truth of Valak truth emerged in pieces. The Abbey had once been a castle. A duke obsessed with dark rituals had summoned the demon centuries. All knights of the church sealed it using sacred relics and the blood of Christ. But during World War II, bombing cracked the foundation. The seal weakened. The demon returned. Its name, Valak. It chose the form of a nun to mock the church. Poison faith to turn holiness into horror. Valak did not want just souls. It wanted to destroy belief. Chapter EIGHD. Abbey was empty. The horrifying discovery came at dawn. Irene and Burke realized. The Rith, the nuns they had seen, were dead. All of them. The Abbey had been empty. The abbess, a corpse in a sealed chamber. They had been speaking to illusions. Too. Valak. The demon had been playing with them, testing their fear. Irene trembled, not just from terror, but from understanding. Her visions had led her here, not to warn her away, but to confront it. Chapter Inyani, the blood of Christ deep. Within the catacombs lay the ancient relic, a vial of Christ's blood, their only weapon. As they descended underground, darkness thickened like suffocation. Voices whispered, their sins, Burke's doubt, Irene's fear, Frenchie's loneliness. Valak appeared before Irene. You have no vows yet. It hissed. You are nothing. Irene shook but did not fall. I am chosen, she said softly. Valak attacked. Burke was impaled. Frenchie dragged. Him away. Irene clutched the vial. Valak lunged. They fell into a flooded chamber. Irene drowned. Water filled her lungs. She saw light fading. Then she remembered her faith. She remembered why she came. With her last strength, she spat the blood of Christ into Valak's face. The demon screamed. Its flesh burned. The chamber shook, and Valak was pulled screaming back into darkness. Ipialogi Yunatienta. Abbey was silent. Burke survived. Irene took her vows fully, left. But something lingered. As Frenchie walked away from the Abbey, a shadow passed behind him. Unseen years later, during an exorcism witnessed by paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, a photograph would reveal something chilling, Familiar face behind Frenchie. Valak had not been destroyed, only contained, and evil never truly dies. It waits. Dicht silence after the scream. Abbey did not celebrate its survival. There were no bells, no hymns, no sunlight breaking triumphantly through stained glass. Only silence. Father Burke lay unconscious for 2 days, his breathing shallow, his skin pale like parchment. When he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Sister Irene sitting beside him. She hadn't slept. "You came back," he whispered. Irene's voice was steady, but her eyes were older now. "So, did you?" But something inside her had changed. The battle with Valak had not just tested her faith, it had reshaped it. Faith was no longer something gentle, it was a weapon. Chapter 11 Irene's choice, the Vatican called it a contained incident. Officially, the Abbey was sealed, records buried, files archived in restricted chambers. But Irene knew better. You do not destroy something like Valak. You interrupt it before leaving Romania. She walked one last time through the courtyard where Sister Victoria had hanged herself. The rope was gone, but the wind still whispered. Irene knelt. "I don't know why I was chosen," she said softly to the empty air. "But if this isn't over, I will not run." For the first time, her vow felt personal. She would not serve God out of innocence. She would serve him out of defiance. Chapter TWL Vida. Shadow on Frenchy Maurice, Frenchy Theriot, tried to forget. He returned to France, found work, laughed loudly in taverns, drank too much wine, but sometimes mirrors lingered too long. Sometimes, in reflections behind him, he saw movement. He began waking with scratches across his back. He told himself they were accidents. Then came the dreams. A long hallway, stone walls, candles extinguishing one by one, and at the end the nun, standing perfectly still, waiting. Chapter Te Endowed returns back in Rome. Father Burke found no peace either. He requested access to forbidden texts. He studied demonology not as theory, but as memory. He began to realize something horrifying. Valak had not tried to kill Irene immediately. It had tested her, measured her, studied her. Demons do not fear strength. They corrupt it, Burke wrote in his journal. If evil cannot break faith, it will attempt to twist it. And he feared that Irene was not done being tested. Chapter 40. In the first 9 months passed. Irene had nearly convinced herself the nightmare was over, until the children began speaking in a quiet convent school in Italy. A little girl described Irene, a woman in black standing beside Sister Irene during prayer. Another child said the woman smiled without blinking. At night, Irene began seeing a familiar shadow stretching across her bedroom wall, longer than her own sometimes. She would wake up standing in the hallway, with no memory of leaving her bed. The demon was not attacking directly, it was eroding reality. Chapter 15. The nature of evil. Irene began to understand something that terrified her more than screams. Valak did not thrive on chaos, it thrived on isolation. It whispered to its victims individually, separated them from certainty, made them question their senses. Because once a person doubts their own mind, faith collapses easily. One evening, Irene looked into a chapel mirror, and instead of her reflection, she saw the nun. Not attacking, not screaming, just watching, and smiling faintly. Irene did not scream. She stepped closer. "If you want me," she whispered, "come fully." The smile widened, then vanished. Chapter 16. The possession revealed years later. A lecture hall. A projector flickers. The paranormal investigators present evidence of demonic cases to a room full of priests. On the screen appears footage of an exorcism. The possessed man thrashes violently. His name, Moristerio.Frenchie. And behind him, frozen in the background of a photograph, stands the pale figure of a nun, watching, unblinking. The investigators presenting the case. Edouard Lorraine pauses the slide. Her hand trembles. That is the demon, she says softly. It calls itself Valak. Somewhere in Rome, Sister Irene feels a cold wind pass through a closed room. She knows it was never over. Chapter Sevianto Unwind. Irene retreats into prayer, but not blindly. She begins reviewing her childhood visions. Every time she saw the nun, it was before moments of spiritual crossroads. The demon did not randomly appear. It followed her. Growth, it wanted something, and then the truth hits her. Valak was not hunting her soul, it was challenging her calling. Demons mock holy symbols. Valak chose the form of a nun. But Irene was becoming something stronger than a symbol. She was becoming unbreakable belief. And if she could not be broken, she ought to be corrupted. Chapter EIGHTN. The confrontation with Inda. Final confrontation was not physical, it was internal. One night, Irene dreamt. She stood once again in the flooded chamber beneath the abbey. Valak stood before her. But this time, Gah. Irene did not hold the blood of Christ. She held nothing. "You are afraid," Valak whispered. "Yes," Irene replied. "You doubt." "Yes." The demon tilted its head. "Then I win." Irene shook her head slowly. "No." Valak paused. "I am afraid," Irene continued. "But faith without fear is not faith. It is ignorance." The chamber trembled. "I doubt," she said, "but doubt forces me to choose belief every day." Demon's expression flickered. For the first time, uncertainty. "You cannot own what I willingly surrender to God." Irene, said light, began filling the water. Valak screamed, but not in rage, in frustration. And Irene woke up, breathing, hard, but smiling slightly, because she finally understood. Evil does not disappear. It loses power when it is no longer feared, blindly. Epialojui, the waiting Valak, was never destroyed. It was resisted. There is a difference. Somewhere in darkness, it still waits, not screaming, not attacking, just patient, because humanity will always have fear. And where fear exists, doors open, and behind some doors. A pale face waits, smiling. Sihes, France. 1956, 4 years after the Abbey in Romania. The air in southern Sies, France, felt warm, peaceful, alive, which is why what happened inside the small Catholic boarding school felt so wrong. It began with a priest found dead in the chapel, no wounds, no blood, just a look on his face. "Why? You're okay," as if he had seen something that hollowed him from the inside. The children whispered about a woman in black walking the corridors at night, the candles near the statue of the Virgin. Mary kept going out, and Sister Irene felt it before she received the letter, that cold tightening in her chest. Valak had moved. Chapter TW and Wytha call Father Burke. Older now, met Irene in private. "Why Euro other have been reports." "Why Euro," he said, carefully. "Why Euro unexplained deaths." "Apparitions." The same description. "Why Euro Irene did not. Euro T need him to say the name." "Why Euro I know." "Why Euro," she said quietly. Burke studied her. "Why Euro Judona, Euro T have to go." Why Euro Jais?" "Why Euro," she replied. "Why I do." "Why Euro this time?" "Ki." She was not the unsetting novice, that she was a woman who had chosen faith after facing darkness, but deep inside the Ayuro, there was still fear, and Valak could smell it. Chapter 20 Anymore, Samoris. Therio was no longer the cheerful Frenchie. He had tried to live normally, but something inside him shifted. Slowly over the years, he would black out, lose time, not wake up in places he didn't. Yoroti remembered going once, He awoke kneeling in a church he had never visited, Euro fingernails, cracked and bleeding from scratching the floor. He heard whispers at night, not outside, him dot inside him, a voice that sounded like silk dragged over bone. Euro, Jew opened a door. Euro, it would murmur, and Maurice would tremble, because somewhere deep in his mind remembered the abbey, and he remembered being touched. Chapter 22 School, when Irene arrived in France. The boarding school looked harmless. Children laughed in the courtyard. Sunlight touched stained glass, but darkness hides best in holy places. The headmistress welcomed Irene politely, yet her eyes were tired. Why, Euro, there is something here. Why, Euro, she admitted. Why, Euro, the children feel it. Why, Euro, Irene walked the halls at night, and she felt it. To dot not chaos, dot violence, dot presence, dot watching, dot measuring, dot chapter. 23th. Goat, the first sign was grotesque. A goat carcass found hanging upside down in the courtyard tree at dawn. Its eyes were removed, carved into the bark behind it. The Kelakaitha letters were jagged, desperate. Morris was discovered nearby, dot unconscious, his hands covered in blood, but he had no memory when he woke. He looked at Irene with horror. Why, Euro, you did I do this? Why, Euro, Irene wanted to say no, but she could feel it now. The demon was not near. Maurice, it was inside him. Chapter 24th. Slow possession. Possession is rarely dramatic at first. It is subtle. Maurice began reacting violently to holy objects. His reflection sometimes blinked half a second later than his body. He spoke Latin fluently, Euro, though he had never learned it. At night, his spine arched unnaturally. His voice deepened. And once, when Irene leaned close during prayer, he whispered in a voice that was not his own, Why, Euro, you could have been mine. Why, Euro, her heart froze, not because of the threat, but because the voice sounded almost a Euro disappointed. Chapter 25. Why the none? Dear during investigation. Irene uncovered ancient texts about Valak, a marquis of serpents, a deceiver, a manipulator. Demons choose form strategically. Valak chose a nun not just to mock the church, but to infiltrate trust, to stand beside faith unnoticed, to blur the line between sacred and profane. That was its power. It did not destroy belief directly. It poised its chapter 26 more as Briggs 1. Storm heavy night, Maurice snapped. The children screamed as he levitated in the chapel. His eyes rolled black. His limbs twisted violently. Candles burst. Windows shattered inward. Irene stood before him. Rain and glass cut her skin. Why, Euro Valak? Why, Euro, she said calmly. Mauricia, Euro es. Mouth stretched too wide. Why, Euro Jew again? Why, Euro Jew, Euro re, afraid of me? Why, Euro Irene, whispered that the demon laughed. Why, Euro, but it sounded thinner now. Why, Euro Jew are nothing without your fear. Why, Euro Irene stepped closer. Why, Euro Jais, why, Euro, Gishe said. Why, Euro Yibot, I no longer belong to it. Why, Euro Mauricia, Euro S. Body convulsed violently. The demon did not like that. Chapter 27, Exorcism. The ritual began at midnight. Father Burke read sacred passages. Other priests held Morris down, but possession is not a wrestling match. It is a battle of will. Valak taunted them, mocked their prayers. Revealed private sins aloud. Burke faltered. One priest fled. Maricia Euroas. Body bent backward unnaturally. Blood trickled from his eyes. And then Valak turned its full attention to Irene. "Why Eurobrique? Why Euro?" it whispered inside her mind. And suddenly she saw visions. The abbey again. Dead nuns. Burke buried alive. Children. Screaming. She nearly collapsed. Nearly. But instead she did something. Different this time. She stopped fighting. She closed her eyes. And prayed not out of fear, but out of love. For the children. For Maurice. For even the broken parts of herself. The chapel filled with warmth. Maurice screamed. A shadow tore violently from his. Body, not destroyed, but forced out, and for a moment while Valak stood, visible before them all. Pale, silent. Burning with hatred. Then it vanished. Chapter 28. Survived. Weak. Scarred. But alive. The school returned to peace. The Vatican declared the case resolved, but Irene knew something they did not. Valak had grown weaker each time. She resisted, not because of rituals, but because of choice. Faith chosen freely is stronger than faith imposed, and demons cannot fully dominate what is willingly surrendered to light. Final epilogiutha. Corridor. Years later, Irene walked alone through a quiet convent hallway. Older now. Stronger. She passed a mirror. For a split second, a pale face appeared behind her, still smiling, still waiting, but this time Irene did not turn around, and the reflection faded, because evil feeds on attention, and she no longer offered fear, only faith. Cinematic. The years of quiet time passed. Maurice tried to rebuild his life. He worked simple jobs, avoided churches, avoided mirrors. Sister Irene remained in service, eventually becoming known for her calm strength during spiritual disturbances. She was no longer the frightened novice from Romania. But evil does not forget. Humiliation, it remembers resistance, and it studies patience. For years, there were no manifestations of Valak, no levitation, no carvings, no violent possessions, only small things. Candles going out in sealed rooms, children describing a sad nun, standing outside their windows, animals reacting violently to empty corners, small signs like distant thunder before a storm. Chapter 30. Why Maurice's declinta. Possession had not ended cleanly. It never does. Maurice began experiencing episodes again, not full control, but influenced that his temper grew unstable. His body weakened without explanation, that his reflection sometimes smiled when he did not. Doctors called it stress. Priests called it spiritual residue. Maurice called it what it felt like. A roommate he never invited. One night, he woke to find himself standing over his own bed, watching his body sleep. Across the room stood a figure in black, the nun, not attacking, just observing. "You are a door," it whispered softly. Maurice woke, screaming. Chapter 30. Realization. Sister Irene began studying ancient demonology texts in secret. she discovered something disturbing. Valak was not merely a demon of destruction. It was a strategist. It targeted faith structures, monasteries, schools, clergy. It did not aim to slaughter masses. It aimed to fracture spiritual confidence. One corrupted priest could spread doubt wider than a massacre. One broken nun could unravel belief in dozens, and Irene finally understood something crucial. Valak's obsession with her was not random. She represented something dangerous to it. Unshakable belief formed after direct confrontation. That kind of faith threatens demons. Because it is informed, and informed faith is hard to manipulate. Chapter 32 Oath. Night of stillness. The final confrontation did not come with storms. It came in silence. Irene was alone in the chapel at midnight. No wind, no thunder, just candlelight. She felt the shift before she saw it. The temperature dropped. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. And from the end of the aisle, the nun stepped forward. Clear, visible, solid, not illusion, not reflection. Valak stood before her, fully manifested. Its pale face carried something new. Not rage, not mockery, curiosity. You no longer fear me, it said. Irene's voice was steady. I fear what you try to make people become. The demon tilted its head. You cannot destroy me. I know. You cannot save everyone. I know. Silence stretched between them. Then Valak did something unexpected. It stepped closer, but did not attack. Why? It asked softly. Why continue choosing belief when you have seen what exists in the dark? Irene answered without hesitation. Because I have seen what survives it. The candles flickered violently. The demon's form began to destabilize. Faith is not a weapon like a sword. It is resistance, and resistance denies permission. Valak reached toward her, but stopped inches from her face for the first time. It looked uncertain. Then its form cracked like fractured glass, and it dissolved into shadow. Not banished, not destroyed, but diminished. Chapter 33 Morris's final chapter years later. Morris's possession resurfaced one last time. This time stronger. The exorcism performed by Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren would become one of the most documented demonic cases in history. Morris survived, but the shadow never fully left him, because some doors, once opened, are never completely sealed. Yet something had changed. Valak no longer dominated him fully. Its influence was weaker, as if starving, as if cut off from something it once fed on fear. Chapter 34. What evil truly wants in her later years. Sister Irene wrote a private journal. In it she described her understanding of Valak. Evil does not require belief to exist, but it requires fear to expand. She realized the demon's greatest weapon was not claws or possession. It was suggestion. The idea that darkness is stronger. The idea that resistance is useless. The idea that faith is naive. And every time a human chooses courage instead of despair, the demon weakens. Not visibly, but measurably. Finalipia Lojuitha, Holloway. Young novice walks alone down a dim convent corridor. It is decades later. The air is cool, the building quiet. She pauses before a mirror. For a split second, a pale face stands behind her. Eyes dark, smile thin. The novice gasps, and spins around. Nothing there. When she looks back at the mirror, it is gone. Because Valak still exists, somewhere in forgotten. A BBEYS. In quiet rooms. In the corners of doubt, but it is weaker than it once was. because people like Irene existed and chose not to break. Her name was Sister Clara Young, devout, newly initiated into convent life in northern Italy. She had heard whispers of the old Romanian case, of Sister Irene, of the demon that took the form of a nun. But legends feel distant when you are young. Until, the first night she heard breathing, not outside her door, but inside her room. Clara opened her eyes slowly. The room was dark. The breathing stopped. She told herself it was imagination. Faith requires discipline, she reminded herself. But doubt had already planted a seed. Chapter 36th Dream that was at Clara. Began dreaming of corridors she had never walked, stone walls wet with condensation, candles melting sideways, a long staircase descending underground. The bottom stood a figure in black. Still. Waiting. One night she gathered courage and walked down the staircase in the dream. When she reached the bottom, the nun lifted her face, not snarling, not attacking, smiling gently. "You are softer than Irene," it whispered. Clara woke up, crying. She did not understand why the name Irene echoed in her mind. She had never met her. Chapter 37th Patonekros, Europe. Minor disturbances were being reported again. Priests experiencing sudden crises of faith. Nuns leaving their vows abruptly after vivid nightmares. Children drawing the same pale face in different countries. No violence, no possession. Just erosion like rust spreading slowly through iron. Valak had changed tactics. Direct. Confrontation had weakened it. Now it worked quietly, whispering doubts, amplifying insecurities. Because a single broken believer spreads darkness faster than a dramatic haunting. Chapter 38 Claras. Test Clara sought guidance from an elderly bishop who had once known Sister Irene. He listened carefully. Then he said something unexpected. "Do not fight it the way others did." Clara frowned. "Then how? Understand it." Zatna, Clara did something no one had done before. When the nun appeared in her dream, she did not run. She sat down on the cold stone floor and waited. The demon approached slowly. "You are not afraid?" it asked. "I am," Clara emitted. "But I want to know what you want." Silence. Then the nun spoke softly. "I want what humans give me freely. And what is that?" The smile widened. "Attention." Clara woke with her heart racing, and for the first time she felt clarity instead of terror. Chapter 13 Starvationkla began teaching children differently. That instead of warning them about demons constantly, she taught them resilience. Instead of focusing on evil, she focused on courage. When children described the black nun, she did not react with fear. She listened calmly and told them, "Darkness looks bigger when we stare at it." Reports of sightings in her region slowly declined, not vanished, but fed it, because Valak's presence thrives in heightened fear. And Clara was lowering the temperature. Chapter 40 Last Manifestation. One final night. Clara stood alone in the chapel. Candles flickered violently. The air chilled, and Valak manaked fully one last time, taller than before, more skeletal, its voice thinner. "You think ignoring me destroys me?" It hissed. "No," Clara replied softly, "but it weakens you." The demon stepped forward aggressively. "You cannot erase fear from humanity." "I don't need to," she answered. "Only teach them not to worship it." The nun screamed, not in power, in frustration. its form fractured like smoke, caught in wind, and for the first time since 1952, the chapel remained warm, no shadow lingered, no whisper followed, just silence, real silence. Final Ipialojuyu, the nature of survival evil, never fully disappears. It survives in cracks, in doubt, in trauma, in guilt. Valak may still exist somewhere, diminished, waiting for fear to swell again. But it no longer walks boldly through monasteries, that it no longer mocks faith openly, because every confrontation taught it something. Humans are fragile, but they are stubborn, and when belief is chosen consciously, not blindly, it becomes difficult to corrupt. Some nights mirrors still flicker, some children still draw pale faces, but fewer now, much fewer, because demons feed on what we give them, and sometimes refusing to feed them is the greatest exorcism, of all.